Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 841, and today is September 29th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot of news to talk about in today's show. First, let's mention the sponsor of today's show, and that is the Expat Money Summit 2025. This is a fantastic online forum. Very important. Don't have to leave your house to get all the information that Mikhail and his team at the Expat Money Show are putting together for you guys. This is a conference that focuses on crafting your perfect plan B. If you want to live abroad, if you need to get out of the United States quickly, how can you be set up to do that? Where can you buy property abroad? What's the tax situation like? Passports, how to get a second passport. We know Rubio is maybe going to get the power to take the passports of Americans who, he deems engaging in unproductive speech. So there is a lot of reasons to attend the Expat Money Summit, and the best one is it's free. Don't have to pay for it. You just sign up at expatmoneysummit.com. You get a ticket, and with that ticket, you get 3 days of events from October 10th to the 12th. So certainly time to sign up now that we're within 2 weeks of the conference. There is a VIP portion of the event if you do have to pay to get there, but you do get a discount when you use the promo code Kyle, and I will actually be one of the people on a VIP panel. So definitely want to check that out at expatmoneysummit.com. All right, and with that, let's roll into the show today. A lot of articles that I've written at antiwar.com, judgenap.com, and of course the Libertarian Institute to discuss on today's show. I know that's a lot of places to follow, so make it easy for you. All my work, both shows, everywhere I write, all the articles get posted on my X handle at KyleAnzalone_. Let's get into today's content. Report: FBI investigating top Obama admin officials for perjury while peddling Russiagate lies. So, a CIA review of the agency's role in the Russiagate conspiracy found that the intelligence community assessment relied on the Steele dossier. Former CIA Director John Brennan and former FBI Director James Comey and other top officials testified under oath that the unvetted document did not influence the ICA's conclusion. The FBI is reported to be zeroing in on the officials. So Paul Sperry reports at Real Clear Politics, a newly released CIA review challenges their sworn denials to Congress that the Steele dossier, a discredited set of allegations about the Trump funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign, was used as the basis for the years-long Russiagate probe that hamstrung the president's first term. The 8-page review conducted by a career CIA analyst found that the dossier did in fact worm its way into the text of the highly classified report known as the Intelligence Community Assessment, or the ICA, to buttress the thinly sourced yet inflammatory allegations that Putin and the Russian government aspired to help President-elect Trump's election chances. Brennan, Comey, James Clapper, and Andrew McCabe are among the top Obama officials who testified under oath that the Steele dossier was not used in the ICA. The ICA and the Steele dossier fueled the Russiagate conspiracy. On Ed, Sperry said the FBI was now investigating the lies under oath as perjury. I'm told by FBI HQ that investigators and prosecutors have been zeroing in on alleged false statements Obama's top spook John Brennan gave in May 11, 2023 deposition. He gave in room 223 of the Rayburn House office building. Sperry explained, the Steele dossier was an obvious fiction that was paid for and used by the Clinton campaign to manufacture the narrative that President Donald Trump only won the 2016 election with assistance of President Vladimir Putin. However, mainstream media adopted the lies in the dossier to convince Americans the president was under control of the Kremlin. So I really think, the Russiagate conspiracy is probably the most consequential political event that we've had in the past 2 decades, since 9/11, right? You got 9/11, that certainly set the tone for some time. But over the past decade, Russiagate, I think, has really set the tone not only of U.S. foreign policy in the confrontation with Russia, the proxy war in Ukraine, but more importantly, domestic policy, this idea that we have fascists and Trump's a dictator. I think a lot of that stems from Russiagate, where you had all this Trump loves dictators, Trump's under the control of Putin really emerging at that time. All right. Moving on here, this next article I wrote for the Institute on September 25th. Trump's envoy Gurnell says he's in talks with Venezuela. Richard Gurnell told ABC Mornings that he's in ongoing communication with the Venezuelan government. A White House official stated that Gurnell's belief in the possibility of a deal with Caracas led to his removal from discussions involving Venezuela. Gurnell, who serves as President Trump's envoy for special missions, was asked about a recently published letter from the Venezuelan government that requests direct talks between Caracas and Gurnell. Trump's envoy noted he had already traveled to Venezuela and met with President Nicolas Maduro. That trip occurred in February and secured the release of 6 Americans who were held in Venezuela. Gurnell added that he remains in communication with Venezuelan officials. Gurnell's belief that making a deal with Maduro is still possible has angered some of his colleagues in the Trump administration. One official told Semaphore that Gurnell had been sidelined on matters related to Venezuela. So the official told the outlet, unfortunately, Rick Gurnell's personal comments have been out of step with the president and administration. The president himself and Secretary of State Marco Rubio should be deemed as the office policymakers. Maduro has slammed Rubio as the Lord of Death and War, and in his letter to the Trump administration really outlined how Rubio was responsible for misinformation leading to tensions between the two states. So the White House has engaged in a large-scale military buildup in the Caribbean under the pretext of stopping drug trafficking from narco-terrorist cartels in Venezuela to the U.S. However, only a small portion of drugs coming from South America arrive in the U.S. via Venezuela. The Trump administration has claimed that Maduro is the leader of multiple cartels placed on the foreign terrorist organizations list. The State Department has placed a $50 million bounty on the Venezuelan president. However, the U.S. intelligence community has said that Maduro is not the leader of a cartel. This month, the U.S. bombed at least 3 boats that departed from Venezuela. Washington says 16 drug traffickers who are members of narco-terrorist groups were killed, but has not provided evidence to support the assertion. This week, U.S. officials told the New York Times that the real goal of military operations in the Caribbean was to remove Maduro from power. And let's get into what comes next. This one from our friend over at antiwar.com, Dave DeCamp. By the way, for the Expat Money Summit VIP panel, Dave DeCamp will be joining me, so I am very much looking forward to that. All right, up next, report U.S. could start bombing Venezuela within a few weeks. The U.S. military could start bombing targets inside Venezuela within a matter of weeks, according to a report from NBC News that was published on Saturday. Sources told NBC that the U.S. military officials are drawing up options for striking alleged drug traffickers inside Venezuela, though the report did not say that so far no plans have been approved by President Trump. CNN previously reported that the Trump administration was considering launching strikes inside Venezuela and was considering hitting targets with the goal of weakening the President Maduro. The U.S. has accused the Venezuelan president of being the leader of a cartel, meaning he could be a potential target. The Venezuelan government has strongly denied the U.S. allegations and recently announced additional military deployments to combat drug shipments from Colombia. Since early September, the U.S. has bombed at least 3 boats in the Caribbean that it claimed were carrying drugs. According to numbers released by Trump, 17 people have been extrajudicially executed in the operations. And so I guess they tipped that number up 1 to 17 now. U.S. officials have told the New York Times that while combating drug trafficking was the pretext for the recent military action in the Caribbean, the ultimate goal is regime change in Venezuela. The policy is being driven by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who has long sought to overthrow Maduro. The NBC report said that Trump administration officials were disappointed that the U.S. military escalations in the region had not impacted Maduro's grip on power or prompted any significant response. One official said that the White House has faced more pushback over bombing boats in the region than expected. Recent polling shows that the majority of Americans are opposed to the U.S. military using force to carry out regime change in Venezuela. Military tensions are soaring between the U.S. and Venezuela. They continue to cooperate on the deportation of Venezuelan citizens from the U.S., and Rick Garnell says he's in communication with Caracas. So this doesn't look good to me. It really looks like the Trump administration is moving forward with this incredibly stupid and dangerous policy. And as I have warned, this is the risk of having Marco Rubio in the administration. This man is a notorious hawk when it comes to Latin America, just wants to overthrow government after government. And if you think the U.S. has a migration problem now, wait until the U.S. overthrows Maduro. That will be a massive, catastrophic crisis. All right. Starting off with some news about Ukraine. First up here, Zelensky meets al-Shara as Ukraine and Syria restored ties. Ukrainian President Zelensky met with Syrian leader Ahmed al-Shara on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York City and agreed to restore diplomatic ties between Kiev and Damascus. The Ukrainian military aided al-Shara's forces as they overran the Syrian government last year. This is a statement from the Ukrainian president's office released on Wednesday. Zelensky held a meeting with presidents of Syria Ahmed Hussein al-Shara. The head of state noted that Ukraine welcomes the restoration of relations with Syria and is ready to support the Syrian people on their path to stability. I guess after Netanyahu, these are probably number 2 and 3 of the most despicable people that the U.S. bats. Of course, Zelensky is the head of a government that's military. Now the backbone of it is made of the neo-Nazi Azov battalion. And of course, Shara, formerly Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, fought with al-Qaeda in Iraq against the United States during the Iraq War. He went on to found Syria's al-Qaeda affiliate, and while Jolani publicly split with al-Qaeda, he remains ties to the jihadist group. Jolani seized power in Damascus last year with the support from the U.S. and its allies, including Ukraine. Kiev has sent about 20 drone operators and 150 drones to Jolani to use against the forces of Bashar al-Assad. While attending the UN summit in New York City, Jolani met with President Donald Trump. He also attended the Concordia summit, where he sat down with retired U.S. Army General David Petraeus, and Petraeus just gushed over him. It was absolutely disgusting. I ranted about this on the last episode of the Kyle Anzalone Show, which of course, you could find top link in the show notes page. So if you want to check out my analysis on that, head on over and watch. All right, next up here, this article I wrote on September 28th for the Libertarian Institute. Zelensky, Ukraine received first Patriot air defense system from Israel. The first of 3 Patriot air defense systems that Israel retired has arrived in Ukraine. So Zelensky told reporters on Saturday, the Israeli system has been operating in Ukraine for a month. We will receive another 2 Patriot systems in the fall. That's all I'm going to say. Tel Aviv has disputed the narrative that Israel sent the air defenses to Ukraine. The Patriot systems were retired by Israel. Washington requested that Tel Aviv return the unused air defense systems to the U.S. The U.S. Department of War refurbished the Patriot systems for Ukraine. The Joe Biden administration developed the scheme. The U.S. has taken 3 outdated Patriot systems and 90 interceptors from Israel for Ukraine. So I do think this is an important kind of dispute on the way it often gets reported versus the way it is. Israel is not sending these directly to Ukraine. It's the U.S. that's ultimately paying for them, paying to upgrade them and then send them to Ukraine after they were not being used by Israel. Now, one, I think, important note here is this probably gives Tel Aviv some leverage over the United States to come to Washington and say, hey, you know, you took those Patriot systems from us, and so now when we get attacked, we need extra support from the United States. So during the war with Iran that Tel Aviv started in June, the U.S. deployed warships and THAAD systems to Israel to assist in shooting down incoming missiles. Washington spent billions of dollars and used significant portions of its interceptor stockpile to defend Israel. Zelensky has desperately appealed to its allies for more air defenses with an emphasis on Patriots. However, the systems are in high demand and low supply. In May, Secretary of State Marco Rubio told Congress Ukraine has asked explicitly for Patriot systems, which frankly we do not have. And that is a quote from Rubio. The Ukrainian leader is seeking a significant financial support to fund the war next year. Zelensky believes the war will cost $120 billion and Kiev will only be able to cover half. Trump has said that he will only sell Ukraine weapons and not continue the buying policy of providing billions in military aid to Kiev. Zelensky says U.S. and Ukrainian officials will hold several meetings next month aimed at developing weapons purchases through various programs. And my guess is these are kind of the schemes that we talked about in the past on this show. The mineral deal being one, and the second one being Ukraine plans to lease or give the United States the intellectual property from the drones that are being developed in Ukraine. Of course, these are being developed at least in conjunction, if not just by the CIA. And so the Pentagon is effectively buying back the CIA's intellectual property that's giving Ukraine to build drones. And who knows how to even value that. I'm sure they're going to way overvalue it. And these are going to be things that never in any long-term way benefit the American people. It's not going to help the American economy. Having access to the Ukrainian minerals, well, those mines are probably never going to develop, certainly not within Ukrainian territory. The information about the drones and things like that. Again, this is all America's information anyways, that, you know, we're helping Ukraine to develop all these things. And so it's not as if this is independently Ukrainian developed and now they're selling something to us that we actually need. These are just schemes that are being cooked up. And so Kiev can say, oh, well, now we have $5 billion in credit to buy American weapons, and so we're going to buy a whole bunch of weapons from the U.S. I think that's really what's going on here and what we're going to see next year, as Ukraine really needs weapons and the Europeans aren't able or willing to pay for everything. So next up here, Zelensky requests Tomahawk missiles, threatens to attack the Kremlin. In a recent interview with Axios, Zelensky threatened to attack the Russian capital and requested that allies provide Kiev with long-range missiles. Vice President J.D. Vance said it was possible to send Ukraine Tomahawks if the missiles were purchased by Europeans. On the Axios show on Wednesday, Zelensky said that he had requested the long-range missiles in a private meeting with President Donald Trump. I think President Trump knows. I said to him yesterday what we need, one thing. By the way, we need it, but it doesn't mean that we will use it, because if we have it, I think it's additional pressure on Putin to sit and speak. While he did not name the Tomahawk, Ukrainian source later confirmed to the outlet that is the weapons platform Zelensky was referring to. In the interview, Zelensky threatened the Russian leadership. They have to know where their bomb shelters are. If they will not stop the war, they will need it. So Moscow says Zelensky's remarks were irresponsible. Zelensky is clearly continuing his desperate efforts. That's why he's issuing threats left and right, which is quite irresponsible, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters. While Washington has long denied giving Kiev Tomahawks, Vice President J.D. Vance says it is now possible. When asked about the possibility of transferring the long-range missiles to Ukraine, Vance told Fox News on Sunday that it is possible, but Trump will make the final decision. He went on to say that Europe would buy the missiles for Ukraine if Trump signed off on the plan. Zelensky's aggressive remarks follow President Donald Trump saying Ukraine could win the war and the Russian military is a paper tiger. So I think this is all really important to put together, that I think Zelensky takes Trump's rhetoric maybe more seriously than he should. Now, if we end up sending Ukraine's Tomahawks, then maybe not. Maybe he is serious about, really doing this. But I think that in Trump's mind, this is about rhetoric, and he thinks rhetoric adds pressure on Putin. I don't think Putin looks at it that way. I don't think it's effective. I think the only person who really listens to Trump's rhetoric is Zelensky. And so now Zelensky is making threats that Ukraine is ultimately not going to be able to back up. And it's ultimately going to cost Ukraine and the Ukrainian people an awful lot when Russia steps up their attacks in response to this. All right, I got a story here that I didn't have a chance to get to at the end of last week, so I just wanted to mention this because I do think it's important to kind of keep up on the North Korea story, even though there's a lot more kind of bigger and breaking news going on day after day. Kim says North Korea open to talks with the U.S. if demand for denuclearization dropped. North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un says he still has fond memories of President Donald Trump and is open to negotiations with Washington under certain conditions. So Kim said on Sunday, this would be last Sunday, the 22nd, if the United States drops its absurd obsession with denuclearizing us and accepts reality and wants genuine peaceful coexistence, there is no reason for us not to sit down with the U.S. Personally, I still have fond memories of U.S. President Trump. The remarks came after the U.S., South Korea, and Japan wrapped up their war games near the Korean Peninsula. The trilateral military drills included preparing for nuclear warfare. Pyongyang condemned the war games for undermining regional stability and escalating military tensions. I think it's a really good sign that we're seeing this comment from Kim after the conclusion of the Western war games, of the U.S.-led trilateral war games with Japan and South Korea. Those war games were very provocative, but I do think this is Pyongyang trying to say, like, hey, if you want to adopt a reasonable policy, there's still a chance for diplomacy here. Trump has also suggested a meeting with Kim and has noted the two had developed a positive relationship during his first administration. So in July, Kim's sister, Kim Yo-jong, said that North Korea was no longer interested in talks with South Korea and would only engage with the U.S. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung met with Trump earlier this month and appealed to the president to facilitate talks with Pyongyang. Lee said that South Korea was willing to accept North Korea as a nuclear weapon state in the short term. Lee's proposal involves making a deal for Pyongyang to halt development of new nuclear warheads while retaining the goal of denuclearization in the long term. And I think this could be a very sensible solution to the tensions on the Korean Peninsula, where the U.S. and Seoul maintain that, yes, we do want to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. However, we are willing to normalize relations with Kim, with the North Korean government, as long as they agree to stop building new nuclear weapons, and then we'll figure out the rest in the long term. And certainly, if you're 20 years down the line, North Korea hasn't developed any more nuclear weapons. There's a lot of commerce between North and South Korea, maybe some commerce between the U.S. and North Korea. Maybe Pyongyang at that point in time is willing to downgrade their nuclear arsenal. I don't know if they're ever willing to get rid of it, but certainly I think that as the relationship between Washington and Pyongyang improves, North Korea is going to see less and less of a need for its strategic arsenal. And so Lee's proposal sounds somewhat reasonable to me. I'll have to get Joe Twillinger back on the show at some point to kind of give me his insights on all this. So one other thing, the South Korean leader argued the new approach was needed as sanctions and isolation of North Korea have proven ineffective. Lee estimates that Pyongyang is adding 15 to 20 nuclear weapons to its arsenal every year. I wonder how far that goes back. It could mean that North Korea has like 50 to 75 nuclear weapons at this point, and is obtaining a somewhat substantial arsenal. Although at this point, I'm sure from the perspective of what it actually means, it's not necessarily just adding more nuclear weapons to the arsenal, but developing nuclear warheads that could go on ICBMs, from submarine launched missiles, miniaturizing and making them smaller, making them able to have larger or scalable explosions, are probably kind of things that Pyongyang is working on, and not just cranking out new nuclear weapons to have a larger arsenal. Or maybe they think they are, because then, hey, if you got 100 nuclear weapons and you say the West will give up 75 if you drop sanctions, well, then you still maintain a fairly substantial nuclear arsenal, and you traded away bombs that you never really intended to use. All right, next up here, Taliban released American prisoner amid Trump's calls to retake Bagram. So the Taliban announced they released an American from an Afghan prison. That American was held for about a year. There are still more Americans held. I think this is maybe a good sign that there are talks going on between the U.S. and the Taliban. Not that this is absolutely crucial for the United States, but for the Afghans, it would probably help them out quite a bit if at least they were not excluded so heavily by the U.S.-led world order. If we drop some of the sanctions, even if the U.S. doesn't begin engaging in trade with Afghanistan, allowing other countries to do so will help out those people quite a bit. I will be talking with Matthew Ho about some of this today, later on the Kyle Anzalone show. So be sure, once again, you're subscribed to the Kyle Anzalone show. You won't want to miss that episode. Next up here, I want to talk about Netanyahu's address to the United Nations. Netanyahu tells UN Israel will finish the job in Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu smote to a mostly empty room as the UN delegates engaged in a mass walkout before the Israeli leader began speaking. Netanyahu claimed Israel had eliminated leadership in Yemen, Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria. He wanted to say Israel would finish the job in Gaza. So he's told the UN General Assembly, or those few people who remained on Friday, the final remnants of Hamas are holed up in Gaza City. They vowed to repeat the atrocities of October 7th. That is why Israel must finish the job. That is why we want to do so. He demanded the release of the remaining 48 hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. The family members of the captives released a statement following Netanyahu's speech, saying his calls to finish the job endanger their loved ones. Netanyahu's call to finish the job and continue fighting endangers the very people we're fighting to save. The statement explains, every day of continued war puts the living hostages at greater risk. The father of one of the hostages attempted to disrupt Netanyahu's speech. Tel Aviv has undermined the diplomatic process to free the Israeli captives and end the onslaught in Gaza. In March, Israel broke a deal that would have led to the release of all the hostages. Earlier this month, Israel attempted to assassinate Hamas leadership as they were meeting to discuss a proposal made by President Donald Trump that would have seen the release of all the Israeli hostages before the ceasefire was implemented. The Israeli leader asserted in 2024 that Israel was close to finishing the job by eliminating the remnants of Hamas in Gaza. While the IDF completely destroyed Rafah last year, Hamas continues to have tens of thousands of fighters in Gaza and holds Israeli hostages. And so this idea that we just have one little last thing to destroy and then this will be over is the lie that Israel has been using for quite some time now. So several top Israeli officials have said the goal in Gaza goes beyond returning the hostages, and the actual objective is to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians from the Strip. Additionally, the Israeli leader's remarks put him at odds with the American president. Trump told reporters on Friday before Netanyahu's address that a deal to end the war was close. Trump and Netanyahu also appear divided on the future of the West Bank. The president held a meeting with Arab leaders on the sidelines of the UN summit and said that he would not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. Netanyahu asserted that Israel would never allow the creation of a Palestinian state, calling the idea sheer madness, and adding it would be like giving Al-Qaeda a state 1 mile from New York City after September 11th, which is kind of a funny and Iran statement to make after Israel helped usher in Jolani into power in Syria, and now Jolani is parading around again meetings with the president of the United States in New York City. But, those two things aren't equivalent. And I think it's really important that Netanyahu is saying he's never going to allow the establishment of a two-state solution, which means Israel is planning to annex the West Bank. During his address, Netanyahu claimed Israel has waged multiple successful wars across the Middle East over the past 2 years. He asserted that half of Ansar Allah's leadership in Yemen had been killed. While Israeli forces assassinated the prime minister of Yemen, Ansar Allah continues its blockade of Israeli shipping in the Red Sea, and a drone launched from Yemen injured 22 people at a hotel in southern Israel on Wednesday. He went on to say that Israel had eliminated the leadership of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Syrian government led by Bashar al-Assad. Netanyahu then threatened to attack Shia militias in Iraq and restart Israel's aggressive war against Iran. While most UN delegates left the General Assembly Hall as Netanyahu began to speak, the Israeli leader said the IDF was broadcasting his speech to Gaza via loudspeaker and by live streaming it through Palestinian phones. And one interesting thing here is just the level of control that the Israeli government has over the phones in Gaza. I think some people point out that how the hell did October 7th happen? If they could just have access to every single phone in Gaza, then certainly they are probably listening in on all conversations and would have pretty good intelligence about what's going on in this strip. And so that it just, I mean, it's disgusting. It's dystopian. It's concerning that Netanyahu could broadcast his speech. But I think it also raises other questions about, what Israel knows about the Palestinians in Gaza. And that just goes to show when, they obviously would probably have the ability to turn on microphones and things like that as well. And so when they're targeting different airstrikes, they have to know when civilians are present just based on the conversations going on. So it makes it even more disgusting that Israel has killed such a large number of civilians in Gaza. All right, next up here. IDF chief warned government that Gaza City attack endangered hostages lacked political endgame. So before the IDF launched its attack on Gaza City this month, the head of the Israeli military attempted to warn Benjamin Netanyahu's government that the operation lacked a political endgame and it would endanger the lives of the hostages. Israeli Channel 13 reported that Chief of Staff General Zamir hand-delivered a secret memo to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu before the attack on Gaza City began. The memo said, the IDF fighters are returning to the same places without political purpose. The operational actions endanger the hostages whose condition is deteriorating. And I did read reports yesterday having confirmed that Hamas said they had lost contact with 2 of the living hostages in Gaza City, which in the past has meant that they were killed by an Israeli airstrike. So the operations in Gaza City have involved a massive bombing campaign and a slow-moving ground offensive and demanding that all 1 million Palestinians in the area evacuate. The family members of the 48 remaining Israeli captives in Gaza were outraged by the report. Their statement said, according to the chief of staff himself, he is sending our children to die and be wounded without purpose. Our children's lives are not expendable. This is the time for the parents of the fighters to stand up and stop this pointless war. Zamir's primary criticism was that Netanyahu's attack on Gaza City lacked a plan for how to replace Hamas in Gaza. He has repeatedly argued that Tel Aviv should agreed to a hostage deal to save the lives of the remaining Israeli captives. Thousands of Palestinians have been killed in the Israeli onslaught on Gaza City. The IDF has destroyed much of the infrastructure in the area and driven hundreds of thousands of Palestinians out of the city. All right. Ned's up here. This is a big one. Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com. Netanyahu meets with pro-Israeli influencers in New York, describes social media as a weapon for Israel. Of course, this comes as the tit-tot sale is occurring, and so it is just highly, highly disturbing that Netanyahu sees this. Now, I think there is a little bit of good news here, and that is they know they're losing. The polls show it. Every single person knows it. The level of acceptable it is to now discuss Israel, to condemn what Israel is doing as a genocide, shows that we are winning the debate. We are winning the rhetoric here. And now Israel is desperate, and they are doing everything they can, including trying to change the narrative on social media to win back the American support. I don't think this is going to work. The raw footage, the raw evidence is just so clear of what's going on here. And there may be additional pushback to this. This is public enough information, and especially if we continue to fight and expose what's going on here, that I think it's possible that we kind of win the battle and actually upset young Americans in particular even more at Israel for not only conducting a genocide, but then trying to hijack their media to brainwash them. All right, this one from JudgeNap.com, September 28th. Gaza Health Ministry says death toll from Israeli onslaught now over 66,000. Of course, this is an undercount. Of course, the number is 2, 3, 4. Who knows how much higher than this? It's certainly in the hundreds of thousands. But I think it is important to note the official number from time to time, just to show the level of destruction that's going on and the number of Palestinian bodies that are still being brought to hospitals. Last story up here today, Palestinian's doctor health declining in Israeli detention. Another article I wrote for JudgeNap.com, this one on the 25th. A human rights group that met with Dr. Hussein Abu Saifa in Israeli detention reported that he had lost significant weight. He has an untreated heart condition and is suffering from scabies. Physicians for Human Rights Israel, PHRI, said that they were able to meet with the doctor in detention on Thursday, and he was formerly the director of the Kamal Adwan Hospital and was arrested by Israeli forces at the facility in December of 2024. Heroically, even when the hospital was under siege and he was facing evacuation orders, he continued to treat his patients and try to save as many people as he could until he was forcibly arrested by Israel. So the statement from PHRI says, since his arrest, the Dr. Abu Saifa has lost approximately 25 kilograms. He suffers from serious scabies and heart problems, but is not receiving any medical treatment. It became clear during the visit that he has not been brought before a judge, investigated, or given any information about the reasons for his arrest. Abu Saifa says his request to see a doctor was ignored. He said abuse was common in the detention facility and talked about cell searches, beatings, and people being deprived of food. All right, everybody, that's where I'm going to wrap it up for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. By the way, check out the Kyle Anzalone show later today. I am very excited to be interviewing the great Captain Matt Ho. I think we're going to have a very important discussion about some of the things we talked about on today's show, some of the things I didn't get into. So be sure to subscribe to the Kyle Anzalone show and you check that out. Thanks, everyone.